Imagine this, a beer brand with personality.
We did 24 beers in 24 weeks, so 6 months with a brand new beer each week. And at the time, that seemed outrageous.
How Garage Project mixed things up in the craft beer industry.
It's more than a hobby, it's almost an obsession.
Kia ora and welcome to Imagine This, a podcast about creative people here in Wellington who have done a great job of bringing their ideas to life. My guest today is a bit of an icon around these parts. His name is Pete Gillespie and he's the co-founder of Garage Project. Hey Pete.
Kia ora, how are you?
I'm well, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So, do you wake up in the morning and you open your eyes and you remember who you are and what you do for a living and you think, wow, I really did manage to pull this off? Do you ever have that moment?
I have had those moments. Obviously we celebrated our 10th birthday last year, and I think that was a moment of reflection, of just stopping and going, crumbs, we have made it. Anyone who's set up a business will appreciate just how crazy it is. And I think Garage Project in particular, because the pace that we've set ourselves, when we try to do a lot and we try to do some quite outrageous things, and the pace with which we do all of that is so fast. I often describe it as being a little bit like running down a hill. You know, when you're a kid and you run as fast as you can down a hill and you get to a certain point and you realise you're running so fast that if you tried to stop, you'd completely come a cropper. So all you can do is just keep running faster and faster. And Garage Project definitely feels like that sometimes.
When you look back at that 10 years, are you surprised by the volume of what you have done in that time?
Yes. We always set up Garage Project to be prolific and interesting. I'd worked at quite a few other breweries before Garage Project. I'd worked in the UK, I'd worked in Australia, and I've always loved beer, but you can become quite a factory worker when you're working in a brewery and you're producing the same beer, over and over and over again. And there's a real science to that, and it's a real skill to be able to produce the same beer identically over and over. And it was a great learning process. But I've always, had these ideas sort of bubbling away, and Garage Project was definitely an opportunity to scratch that itch and just be able to do whatever we want.
Do you think that's a challenge for anyone who is creative, but they find themselves with a product that they are replicating over and over again, that the original process of coming up with the idea and refining it and playing with it can sometimes get lost in the fact that once you become successful and prolific, you actually have to make the thing and get it out there to the market. And as you say, it has to be the same product.
I find pleasure in both. So, I guess I'm lucky that way. And I'm lucky because the way we've set up Garage Project, there's always something new. We started off, I've told the story loads of times and most of Wellington already knows. So, we did 24 beers in 24 weeks. So 6 months with a brand new beer each week. And at the time, that seemed outrageous and just over the top. But I think our strike rate has been higher than that almost every year since then. So we're doing more than one release a week. So that's a lot of new product. But at the same time, for a brewer, there's almost nothing more satisfying than somebody who passionately loves your product, one product in particular. A lot of craft beer drinkers, they want to try something new, and we do that for them. But there's also a real beauty in someone who just loves your product. I love Happy Days. It's the beer I drink. That real kind of monogamous relationship with one of your products. And I love that. I love that just as much as the kind of the creative, new, exciting stuff. So GP's set up well that way. A little bit of both, because we have really, quite a solid core range that sits behind this experimental stuff, which is cool.
So for people who don't know the story, tell me about how this came to life.
Brewing is a fascinating thing. It gets under people's skin.
Why?
there are just certain things that have, that word otaku. I've heard people use it in various ways, but one of the descriptions I had was something that just creates, it's more than a hobby. It's almost an obsession. And brewing definitely has that. Some things have it and some things don't. The big one that somebody used as an example that I read was mustard. No one really gets excited about mustard. Chili sauce. People go crazy for chili sauce.
True.
For some reason, chili sauce has just got that otaku. People will travel around the world to try and get hold of that special chili sauce. And beer, and in particular craft beer, has definitely got that as well, And it just, once it gets under your skin, people throw away fantastic jobs to go and probably never earn the same money ever again just so that they can pursue their passion to brew beer.
Were you willing to do that?
Yeah. I used to brew beer with my grandfather when I was tiny, and, I think ever since that moment, I've just kind of loved it. There's a magic to it. You create something first. You create something with your hands, and then you add yeast, and then this magic happens, I always remember like his kitchen, there'd be little things blurping away. It's like alchemy. It's super cool.
It's amazing how those early experiences in life are sort of imprinted on your brain. Absolutely. It's like there's a sort of emotional memory.
I'll catch sometimes when I'm in the brewery, even today, this is like almost 50 years later, I'll just catch a little whiff of something, a little smell. And, those smells are really good, aren't they, at just kicking off a feeling. It's not even a memory, but just like a sensation inside you. And, yeah, I find it quite comforting and nostalgic. It's awesome. Yeah.
So you had a crack at a business prior to Garage Project, didn't you?
Well, I'd been brewing for 10 years. So I brewed in the UK. I threw away, I chucked a previous profession to go and pursue this.
What was that? What was the previous profession?
Look, I studied journalism and public relations at university, and I ended up doing a PhD, which
Wow.
So I finished that solely so that for mental health reasons, because it took a long time, and if I'd left it uncompleted, I would have hated myself. So I finished it, but my real passion was home brewing, and I was like, God, I have to follow that. Otherwise, I just thought that in the future, at some point, I'd just wake up and just wish that I had. So, if there's anyone listening, I do encourage people to pursue that passion, that dream.
Is that easier said than done, though, when you have people in your life who are telling you that that's a dumb decision?
Oh, there'll always be people telling you it's a dumb decision. And look, it's never a sensible decision. Mm-hmm. And it undoubtedly, it was an incredibly hard path to take. I was lucky I had a super supportive partner and, but no, it won't be easy. But I do wonder if you don't pursue that little itch, whether it will, it'll just sort of sit around and you'll just always wonder what would have happened.
Why do you think some people are willing to make that call and others aren't? Do you think that there are particular personality traits or a disposition that's associated with people who take that leap, or can anyone do it?
Probably. I think I'd always been fairly reckless. My PhD was on risk-taking.
Really? Stand you in good stead in business then?
It was an interesting cathartic experience, I suspect. It was like a transition from my own risk-taking to maybe different forms of risk-taking. For me, it was something that I knew I had to pursue. And, it was a long journey. I just went to the UK and basically managed to blag my way into a brewery and started. You don't earn very much being a brewer in the UK, and it was a long path, but fascinating. And I brewed in Australia after that, but I did. I really, really wanted to have my own brewery, and so I did. I tried to set one up in the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney.
Beautiful spot there.
Stunning spot. And at the time, there were no breweries, and, I was incredibly attached to it. I loved it, and I thought it would be a fantastic spot for a business. But the bureaucracy in New South Wales at the time was just so incredible. Always feel like there's a way to think outside the box and just, be clever and work your way around things. But it really felt at the time that there was just nothing outside that box. No one, the rules were so rigid, and there were so many layers of it.
So why did you come back to New Zealand?
So my brother lived in Wellington, and I came to visit him. And at the time, and I don't know if this is still the case, but at the time, 56% of all the craft beer in New Zealand was consumed in Wellington, which, given what a small sliver of the population there are living here, I just found that fascinating. Wellington's always, it's a city of early adopters and people who love to try something exciting and new. And so I came over, and there was this amazingly vibrant craft beer community. And I was working for Lion Nathan in Australia at the time, and I was aware that they just shut the Max brewery. Remember, there was a Max,
Yes.
like an actual brewery producing beer at the end of Taranaki, and they pulled that out for economic rationalist reasons. And I just at the time I was like, that is crazy. They've just relinquished this, their foothold in the craft beer capital of New Zealand. And now there's nothing. It was a vacuum. And so, it came at a moment where things had just got so frustrating in the Blue Mountains. And my brother was like, come on over, come and, we'll go and have a few beers. And I came over, and people were like, why don't you set up a brewery here? And I was so shell-shocked by the experience in Australia. I was like, I actually, during the holiday, I went to the council, and I was like, would you stop me? And they were like, No, that sounds great. And I'm like, are you sure? and then I went to Customs and Excise, not what you normally do on your holidays, but
No.
I went to Customs and I said, would you try and stop me? And they're like, no. I mean, we'll charge you, but we won't stop you. And so, just after that, I was like, well, I couldn't work out why there were no breweries here. And so I sold my house in Australia. I chucked everything in, and my partner and I and children came over here, and after 6 months, managed to get Garage Project up and running with the help, I have to say. So I set it up with Joss Ruffle, who was my brother's best friend and who I've known for a long time. And he was fascinating. His background was in computer games, and business activation was his kind of passion. And he'd seen what had happened in craft in America, and I think that had kicked off. He said things get under your skin with brewing. I think it had got under his skin as well. And so, yeah.
What was it like starting a business?
What was it like starting a business? It's terrifying often. Honestly, you're putting everything on the line, and it is a gamble. You especially if you're doing something really different. And so, look, we had little or no money at all. And it was a massive gamble. That's one of the reasons we did the 24. We had a tiny little 50-litre pilot plant. We were producing one keg at a time. So it was all about, brewing is an expensive thing to do. There's a lot of stainless steel that needs to be bought. And I think we thought of it as almost as taking a guerrilla approach. We knew that small kit would never make any money, but it was an opportunity to craft a brand and get a following. And, it was like a proof of the idea before we had to go out and get money. And, for us, it paid off.
You have a very well-established brand that is held in great fondness by a lot of Kiwis. I'm always interested in brands like yours. Was it planned this way? Was it curated? Was it designed? Or is this a brand that has sort of emerged organically over the last 10 years?
It's emerged largely organically, but with a lot, there was a lot of thought behind it, but never, it's just come from Joss and myself.
What sort of brand did you want to have for Garage Project? What was the personality that you were trying to create?
Oh, a little bit mischievous. Our tagline is try something new. So obviously, kind of relentlessly trying to push boundaries a little bit. I've always enjoyed pushing boundaries a little. And I think that's kind of obvious in Garage Project. Sometimes things are a little bit mischievous. There's a cheeky quality to it. But we always, one of the things that we decided early on, like an aspiration, and we did think about these kinds of things. We wanted to be loved locally and we wanted to be respected internationally. So that was always in our kind of mindset. Do you know we sent beers to Melbourne before we sent them to Auckland?
How come?
We felt like Melbourne at the time, this is 10 years ago, but Melbourne felt culturally closer to Wellington than we felt Auckland was, especially in relation to beer. And so, we felt that there was a huge affinity and a hunger for the kind of things that we felt we were doing in Melbourne. And so we were sending beers over there.
How did that brand and that identity sit alongside the other brewing companies, the established companies that were in that market?
Obviously quite radically different from the large breweries.
Did you get any pushback?
Did we get pushback? Look, I try to have as little to do with the industry as a whole.
Really?
Yeah. I know maybe that's wrong. I try and be super supportive to young brewers, and there's some fantastic kind of like little breweries that have started up, and we always like to try and be supportive.
But why is that? I'm really interested in why that is.
Well, one of the reasons is that I don't like, I try and avoid anything on social media about other people's beers, because
Right.
I think it's very difficult for you to be aware of other people's ideas and not have them just slip in, not consciously, but to have them slip into your way of thinking. I obviously you have to draw inspiration from somewhere, but I've always felt at GP we try and draw inspiration from, other fields, other things. Sometimes even totally unrelated things, music or, food or, there's all sorts of sources of inspiration. It shouldn't be just what other people are brewing.
Do you think it's tempting for businesses to compare themselves to others?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Constantly, probably in some cases.
Yes. And look, I'm sure, to be absolutely honest, I'm in a privileged position because I think probably Joss, who is the other co-founder along with my brother, is probably cops a lot more of that than I do, Look at me in my ivory tower coming up with beer recipes. He has to do all the hard work.
So there's also an interesting point, I think, around validating your idea, because many people on this podcast have said, look, you need to do the homework before you go to market. You need to research this. You need to work out, do people actually want this? That process can take time. How do you strike a balance, and you're doing this all the time, how do you strike a balance between validating an idea and getting some intel on whether it's going to be well received, but that not completely stifling your creative process?
Absolutely. And look, it's a really interesting one. And obviously I worked in the brewing industry for 10 years before Garage Project. So it wasn't that we just arrived with no idea.
Just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Wall. So I'd like to think that it's, having done that, and I would never regret having worked in other breweries and larger breweries, and, those learnings are fantastic. It's almost, to use an art analogy, you find abstract painters who they did all their early learning was in sort of very figurative, realistic stuff. So it's like you learn those basics and then, learn the rules and then learn how to break them after that. It's always been my approach, and definitely what's happened at GP. In terms of look, I know it sounds arrogant, but we often just do creative new things, and it's not like we've gone out to try and find whether the market wants it. If we feel like if we're excited by it, then surely someone else is excited by it as well.
Have you adopted a fail fast approach? It sounds like you're creating a lot of ideas and testing them all the time. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. Well, look, we're still producing more than one brand new beer a week, I think, on average. And people often ask, if you tinkered around with this recipe a lot before you do it. And we don't. like I always said to people, I find it really, really distills your focus when you're producing several thousand litres of something. You know, you can't cock it up. You've really got to, you know, to be very focused on it. So we tend to just go straight to a large size product. And it sounds outrageous to do that.
It sounds scary.
But it's interesting. It is a risk. But then, of course, when you've done lots and lots of other beers before, you know, it's like you've maybe, of course, you've never done that particular beer before, but there'll be components of it which you have done. So you're ring fencing the risk. You've learned what's gone on in the past, and the risks you do take are, in the end, even though they seem enormous, are perhaps incremental because you've built up that knowledge over time. So we do. I mean, generally, as a rule, if I'm excited by something, and it seems to work. You know, obviously, we're never going to release something that tastes terrible, and beers have gone down the drain, but perhaps not quite as many as you might imagine.
What does success look like now?
What does success look like? I mean, honestly, at the moment, with everything that is going on with COVID, success is survival. I mean, look, we're doing all right, but it's not easy out there. And I suspect it's not easy. I suspect it's even harder for a lot of people. I mean, you know, it's incredibly difficult for anyone in hospitality at the moment. I mean, you must know people in hospo, and it's a nightmare. It's awful. But then also, you know, I mean, we're a brewery, so, you know, a significant component of our revenue comes directly from hospo. So, you know, when hospo fails, we suffer too. It is, look, you know, I think this is a time for kind of drawing in a little bit. It's a time for just, you know, accepting that things maybe, you know, the big ideas that you've had maybe need to just wait a little bit. It's just about survival. Wasn't that terrible? But, you know, who expected any of this?
The rules have changed in the last couple of years. Totally. And I mean, look, you know, when COVID first came and that first lockdown hit and all the bars just shut overnight, I mean, that was one of the most terrifying, lowest moments for Garage Project, because suddenly, I mean, imagine it's like, you know, it was almost half of our revenue disappeared overnight. You know, and I talked about it being a family. I mean, we've got all of those people in a business, and, you know, I mean, it's hard not to care deeply about the people that work for you and put themselves on the line for you all the time. And just, you know, suddenly that horrible, cold, sinking kind of panicky feeling that, shit, you know, are we actually going to get through this? Everyone took a pay cut across the business, everybody, so that we could kind of conserve what we had, to try and keep everybody employed, because obviously, you know, overnight, everyone from our venues was basically, you know, without a job. So we did that. And, you know, I mean, we were incredibly lucky because for us, we had a web store already set up. No one had ever really used it. It was just sort of, it sat there and it ticked over. Occasionally somebody would order something, but it was all there. And then overnight for us, it went absolutely ballistic. And so we were lucky. We were able to draw the hospo staff in, and they took on different roles. And, you know, I mean, it didn't make up for what had gone, but it certainly, it breathed a bit of oxygen to us at a time where things felt pretty grim. Do you still enjoy all this?
I enjoy an awful lot. I still love brewing. I did a little mini brew the other day. And obviously, I don't brew as much as I used to, and I've got a fantastic team of brewers. But, you know, I just was doing a little trial batch of something. It was a beer for Wellington on a plate, which, believe it or not, we have to start brewing now. But it just still brings me enormous pleasure. Like, you know, I like that a lot. Like I said, it gets under your skin. It's hard to get out.
Do you see yourself doing this for another 10, 20, 30 years?
Don't know what else I'd do. Look, I mean, the things that I love about this, I mean, there's a lot that I perhaps don't love about having a big business, and I'm lucky now that, you know, we've managed to bring fresh new people into GP who are good at doing those things. I mean, that as advice for other business people, you know, be aware of what you're really good at, and don't be afraid to bring people in who are good at the things that you aren't good at, because it really does help, and it frees you up to bring maximum value. It's awful if you get to a position where, you know, you're bogged down doing things that you're not great at, and therefore you don't have that energy to do the things that really add value to your business. So, you know, be aware of that, I'd say. Do I still do it in 20 years? Bloody hell. Don't know. I'd imagine I'll still be hopefully making beer. That'd be nice.
Awesome. Pete, it's been so great to hear more about your journey. Thanks so much for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Imagine This is brought to you by Wellington NZ. Check out more episodes right here or wherever good podcasts are found. See you next time.